Hi everybody, welcome to the studio. Today's video is talking about the next block for the Baltimore album quilt. And the next block is going to be a center medallion block. And the center medallion is going to consist of this chalice. And this chalice is going to be surrounded by a border of a grapevine. And I will put the information on where you can locate these patterns in the description below. So once I decided for, that the next block would be a medallion block, I had to decide, okay, what size. So I ended up putting 4 of the blocks together that I have been using for my individual blocks for the quilt. And all of my blocks I marked the same. And it ended up that these markings made a center medallion block with a border. And it was like an aha moment. It was wonderful to see this because this is going to provide some balance to the whole quilt because I'm using these same size blocks that are within the quilt anyway. So what I decided is, now that I had this decision made, the next was the size of the patterns. So what I ultimately ended up doing is I figured out the difference between this 12.5-inch block, which is what the patterns are designed for, and my block, which ends up being about 16 inches. So I figured out that difference, and based on that percentage difference, I went to the copy center and made my enlargements. So it ended up that this, the difference for an enlargement for my block was roughly 130% for the center. And then for my border, it was actually a percentage decrease because my border, it ends up being 8 inches and the pattern calls for a 10-inch border. So when I went, I ended up, thank goodness, I got my copies on both sides of whatever that percentage was based on the difference. And it ended up that I went with 150% increase for this center block. And the reason that I did that is because once I came home with the 130% enlargement for that center block, I actually took the pattern, and this one is at 124% enlargement, so it's pretty close. But basically I took and I put it up to my patterns, to my blocks, and it's virtually the same size. And it might be a little bit wider because these wheat stalks will be on this side as well. But I knew that I wanted my center chalice to be large. I wanted it to fill this block. So ultimately I went with 150%. For the grapevine, I ended up going with 136% enlargement, and that's a decrease from the pattern. The pattern actually calls for 150% enlargement for a 10-inch border, and so my percentage was a decrease because I'm at an 8-inch wide border. So that's where we're at with patterns, and so the next step is getting those patterns traced onto my 4 sewn blocks that are sewn together. I have the 4 blocks sewn together and I have them on the light table. I thought I would show you kind of my process at the light table. And so here is my light box. And before I actually start kind of showing you the tracing, I thought I would take a couple of minutes and show you my light box. My light box consists of 2 like file folders, and then I have my light. And then this is just a plexiglass from your box store. So you don't have to have, you know, fancy, expensive equipment. You can use what you have. And in fact, I have used my window many a times, and I still do. So that's always available for you too. So the next step is for tracing. And before I get to that, I thought I would share with you my marking pen. My go-to marking pen is this Dritz dual purpose marking pen. And one side is air erase and the other side is water soluble. I've never had a problem with this pen, and I use it for my tracing. I use it for all of my marking, and I also use it when I'm on my long arm, and I've never had a problem with it. I do want to make sure that you realize that this marking pen is heat sensitive. So if I were to iron this, it would become permanent. So you just kind of want to keep that in mind when you're using this pen, or even during the summertime where I am, it gets very, very hot. And so if I were to leave this in a car, I would be a little concerned, you know, when it's 102 heat index out there. So the other thing also, when you are marking on fabric and whatever project you're working on, pre-test before you actually mark where you're going to mark on top of the quilt or pattern or whatever. Mark on your fabric on the back in an inconspicuous spot. I use the seam allowance, and I will do a mark on that and I will remove it. And I actually do it in several spots just to make sure that this is coming out. And if there's multiple fabrics in whatever project you're working on, I do it on each fabric. So now what I do while I'm tracing is I have my pattern taped to the plexiglass, and then my fabric I have secured with these little clippies. And so everything is very secure. Get that back down there. And when I go to mark, I use a very light hand, and I go in between my fingers. I spread my fingers apart, and then whatever is within that area is where I mark. And the reason that I do that is because you can see as my finger is moving around, the fabric is moving. And especially when you're on a straightaway, your fabric moves. And so by marking in between my fingers, it kind of secures the fabric a little bit. And so when you start marking, just take your time and use a light hand and slowly keep going. If your fabric starts moving, just lift your pen and keep going. Sometimes where the seams are, it can be a little harder to see. So once you get done, then I always turn my light box off, and you'll be able to see any spots that you have missed, and it's just a lot easier doing it this way than finding something after you've already taken this off and trying to realign it. That's where we're at. I am so excited to be at this point, and the next step is going to be auditioning fabric. So I hope you'll join me in the next video where we talk fabric. Thank you so much for joining me. I also want to give a huge shout out to the subscribers out there. Thank you so much. We appreciate you. You all have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye now.